What you can do is do your internal work, your self-reflection, and understand yourself. Each of us have our own list of fears, our own list of biases, our own list of stereotypes that are impacting how we show up in the world.
Meet Hilary Davies, a social psychologist specializing in leadership coaching for women. She helps businesses develop diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the workplace.
From that business point of view, why is this so important? Hilary,
Naison.
I love understanding where people come from and more specifically what their childhood was like. How would you describe that early childhood environment?
It's a good and interesting question. And I grew up in the northeast of England in two parents and my older sister, and we had a very, I would say, typical middle class suburban childhood in the northeast of England. It was a very, very loving and stable home environment. We did a lot of things as the four of us. My parents were both very active and instilled in us that sense of love of the outdoors and the sports we did. It was I would say rather non-eventful but happy childhood. We came to South Africa to visit my mom's family maybe every 4 or 5 years, if we could afford it. But for the most part, zero complaints, very happy. At some stage, I'm not sure how old I was, my dad got cancer, and he passed when I was 13. And then after that, it was just my mom and my sister and I for the most part. But so that's, a big event, but otherwise, no, I have no complaints. I always had a very lovely childhood.
Were you close to your dad?
I actually have and it's something that's kind of stuck with me. I have a very terrible memory of my childhood, and as in the recall is not so good. I remember very specific things about him, or specific activities, but in terms of day to day, my memory isn't so good on it. I think one of the things that I'm most sad about is that I never got to know him as an adult. I think we would have been actually quite good friends as adults, and I was still very much a child by the time he passed. I'm also not sure how much his illness impacted what would have been a more normal childhood for the years before when he was ill but hadn't died yet. So close, but hadn't developed into a friendship with him yet.
What's the impact of losing a parent so young? And do you have any experience of kids, specifically below the age of 18, losing a parent? And is there any data that you've seen of the effects of that and how it perhaps changes them in some way?
It's not an area that I've looked into in detail. I think from my experience, and maybe I'm going to just give you all of the stuff that's come up in my own therapy and to do my own work. For me, there's a sense of security that I sometimes lack, especially in relationships. But in general, I actually had a conversation this morning with a lady who runs a consultancy I might be doing some work with, and she's 67 and going strong and loving it and growing the business. And I've always had this list of and I want to do a PhD sometime, and I want to do this, and I want to do this, and I want to do this. And I just had this sense of this morning, I'm 35, I'm fine. I've got loads of time. And I look at her energy and how she's going. So I think maybe for me, there was a bit of a sense of a finiteness of life. I've always been aware that we're not going to live forever. And maybe that's, I guess in some people that's maybe a driving force. I think for me it's more of a bit of a fear and a bit of a hesitancy. But on the positive side, if you can call it that, my mum, my sister, and I had a very, very beautiful relationship, not without its dramas along the way and other family dynamics. But yeah, certainly as since my sister and I have been adults, yeah, it developed a closeness there that's quite special.
When I was researching you, of course, I came across your website.
Yeah.
And I have a Hilary Davies quote that I would like to say.
Oh,
the first
lovely.
one. And just some context, this is just fast forward from that childhood, now going back a bit for the past 7-8 years. And the quote I read is, "During this time, I went back to university and changed career, moved to South Africa, ended a long-term relationship, and been through 2 other significant relationships. Got through the pandemic, studied again, started a business, had a miscarriage, and supported my mother through terminal cancer." When I first read that, I was like, just going through one of those things is so significant and can be just damaging. How did you deal with that period?
And I would go as far to say still dealing with, and they didn't happen in that order. But yeah, I am very lucky that I have an incredible support structure around me, and whether that was in the UK, as I say, my sister and her wife are incredible for me. They've been there forever and are my absolute rocks. And friends in the UK, my family here, so my aunt and uncle, cousin here, and the friends and community that I've built here. And because I'm such an external processor, I talk, and I'm a big believer in talk therapy, whether that's with my therapist, whether that's over a glass of wine and with friends on an informal basis. So I've been through all of those changes. I've been very, very held. I also think what I did learn from my parents, and whether that's, I mean, not consciously, but whether it's through observing how my parents dealt with my dad's illness and how my mum dealt with her loss, is that you don't really have a choice. You keep going. And some of those things were my choices, and some of those things were happened to me, or for me, or however we want to phrase it. But that is what's happening. And I kind of hate the stoicism around it, but actually there is always someone going through a hell of a lot worse than you. And I believe in allowing that, the pain. I have talked in some of my talks before about a kitchen floor moment, and actually when I was ending the relationship with my long-term partner in the UK, definitely when my mum was ill, definitely when I was having these crises about, do I go back to the UK or do I stay here? I find myself on the kitchen floor in tears, and there's something about being on the kitchen floor that feels like bottom, and there is an act of, you have to stand up now. You have to stand up and make a cup of tea, or you have to stand up and hang the washing out, or whatever that thing is. But you have to get up and carry on, because you can't stay on the kitchen floor forever. And that's a metaphor for life. I am very grateful that I've never had to worry for myself about serious things around, where's my next meal coming from? Am I going to have a place to sleep tonight? I have been very protected and provided for in that sense. And actually all of the experiences that you listed there in some way have shaped me into the life choice that I've made now. So the decision to stay in South Africa, the work that I'm doing, the reason I left engineering and moved into psychology, it's all happened for a reason. And I really believe that's part of the narrative and the life that we create for ourselves. There has been a lot. Most of it has worked out for the good, in some sense, obviously not losing people. But we do with it what we can. And so, for example, with my aunt, I have the most incredible relationship with her here. I probably wouldn't have if my mum was still alive. So yes, of course, I miss my mum. I would love to see her. There's so much I want to tell her on a daily basis. But I can see and appreciate the gift that I have through the relationship I've developed with my aunt. So there's always a way to learn from and as cheesy as it sounds, grow from the things that happen to us and for us.
I think also what I'm getting from that is courage to actually get off the kitchen floor, for one, where some individuals who go through that or worse would remain stuck. But you had a support system and currently have a support system. And then, of course, that courage. What else do you think individuals need to move past that? What is it, this internal drive, or is it that hitting rock bottom and then break the glass, things change, now it's time?
I don't think there's one answer. I think it will vary massively depending on what it is that a person is dealing with, on their own background, their own the way that they're wired, the way that their belief systems work about themselves as much as anything else. I'm lucky that I've been brought up not to question whether I can do something. There was never, I had a lot of affirmation as a child. I was pushed to be the best in my swimming galas and be like achieve A grades, and I was pushed, and in an encouraging way, and that instills a sense of confidence that actually whatever is happening, I will be able to get through this. And certainly the first few big things, like ending the relationship, like when Mum was ill, there were moments of I don't know that I can do this, but the more you do, the more you see actually I am very, very resilient. And even if I don't know now, so for example, I said the example of get up and make a cup of tea. That's because I know I don't need to get up off the kitchen floor and go and fix the world, or if the next step that I need to do is make a cup of tea, then I am done for the day. Like, I got up off the floor and I drank my tea. That's perfect. So there's definitely courage is needed. There is a sense of faith in oneself, and the more we do hard things, the more we believe that we can do them. And more recently, again, definitely not 8 years ago, but probably in the last 2 to 3 years, I have quite a strong faith that there is a higher something, whether you want to call it God or universe or whatever, and having the faith that there must, even if we haven't got a clue why it's happening and it doesn't make any sense in the moment, there must be a reason behind that. And that sort of grounding in faith has helped me massively with, even with bouts of depression that come through, or being self-employed, there's sometimes those quiet spells where you're like, oh, is this the right thing? Do I need to start applying for jobs? And a trust of coming back to, no, I believe in the work that I'm doing. I believe that I'm good at the work I'm doing. Let's ride this out. Let's reframe this from, it's not that I haven't got any work, it's that this is a period that I can rest, or this is a period I can be creative in doing something new, or bringing a new offering to the world, or maybe it's a time that I can check back in with the really base stuff around my marketing strategy, or redo the website. There's opportunities within that as well. So trusting in those moments that feel sticky is massive.
I love your zoom out perspective. Look at the bigger picture of, cool, there's a reason for this happening, but what can I do until that thing happens?
And to be clear, it's very easy for me to sit here and say that now. If you were with me at the beginning of July and I was still in my pajamas at 2:00 on a Wednesday afternoon, we'd be having a different conversation. But it is that sense of, I've been here before, and it's not nice for a couple of days. And then at a certain point, it's like, no, I remember this feeling. I know how to do this. I know how to get up again. And I know how to do that reframing. And I think that's a skill. And again, this is what comes through in the coaching work. The more we learn to reflect on our own experiences, the more we learn about ourselves, the more we can use that information going forward.
Getting into coaching, I have another Hilary Davies quote.
I don't think I've ever been quoted back to myself before.
This is a goodie. My work is based on simple theory that for someone to feel fulfilled in themselves and their work, they must first have their basic needs met: safety, security, and belonging. Could you expand on that?
Sure. So that's based on Maslow's hierarchies of needs. So pretty basic psychological theory. Some people would critique it quite heavily, but for the most part, we as humans have basic physiological needs, and then we move into psychological needs, and then we move into growth needs. So it's, yeah, am I safe physically? Have I got food? Have I got shelter? Have I got water? Am I warm and taken care of? And you move up the ladder. A lot of us have some, if not all, of those aspects met, and certainly if you have a stable job and stable income, you are probably playing in the field of the first two tier being met. Then we're moving into a sense of belonging, and that's things like, do I feel accepted in my workplace? Do I feel held by my family? Do I have a circle of friends who I can be myself with, and I don't have to worry about behaving a certain way or doing a certain thing? Do I have a larger sense of belonging in society, or do I feel like an outsider? We cannot focus on those belonging needs if we're still trying to put a roof over our heads, if we're trying to make sure that there's food on the table for the children. If that's where the focus is, and really in survival, we're not going to move into the belonging needs. And then from belonging, we move up to self-esteem needs, which is I feel valued, I feel loved by the people around me, people make me feel good about myself, I feel good internally. And then it's only after that, then you move into self-actualization, which is becoming the best version of yourself. So that's Maslow's hierarchy. As I say, in order to feel fulfilled, to get to those self-esteem needs and self-actualization, we need to have the basic foundations right. Part of the issue that we have today, even if we have stable income, have a safe home to live in, a warm home, have 3 meals a day, we don't always prioritize ourselves. And this is more true for women than men, because women naturally take on more care responsibilities. Even if we have the resources to meet our basic needs, we don't always allocate themselves to ourselves. And then we end up giving away rather than nurturing in, and then that stops ourselves moving up the ladder.
I think I'm curious as to those. Why do we hold ourselves back, specifically women, and not actually, move up the ladder?
And a combination of things, and in no particular order. The one is kind of what I spoke into there, is around social norms and societal norms. And that's more linked to gender, around the way that our society set up has been traditionally that women fulfill care roles, support roles, they run the household, and men go out and earn and provide and do those sorts of things. So now that societally we're shifting and more women want to go out and earn, but the responsibility of care or the auxiliary roles are still sat with them, there's a limitation in their resources. They can't do everything. So there may be either a conscious choice, or it just happens because that's the way that the relationship is, that even without children, and this is not an all men thing, plenty of men carry their weight, but maybe both people in a relationship work full time, but it's the woman who goes via the supermarket on the way home to get the food. And even if she's not doing the physical act of that, it's often, and again, not to generalize for everyone, the woman who's thinking, actually, we do need to think ahead to dinner. I know X, Y, and Z is in the fridge, so I could make that, but then I'm missing this ingredient, so I do need to get that on the way home. So there's the physical load, and then there's the mental load of the thinking and the planning that goes with it. So that's the roles aspect of things, and that, an example of shopping is a small one, but it transpires across many things.
But are those unassumed responsibilities?
Can be stated. It depends on the person. It depends on the relationship. It depends on the family dynamic. It could be anything. But then it could also be, and this is what it comes on to, internalized by the woman. It's often we're not thinking, begrudge my partner because I'm the one who has to go to the supermarket on the way home. There's a lot of things that are internalized for women because we've been trained since we were young girls. If you walk into a department store selling baby clothes, you get pink and blue ones. That's still now, and there's nothing wrong with that. If girls want to wear pink, girls want to wear pink. But if boys want to wear pink, why don't they wear pink? But we start conditioning from a very young age. The toys that we give to children, the subjects that we study at school, I remember when I spoke to my career advisor and I was 17 and I said I wanted to study chemical engineering. And even then, so that was kind of 2006, 2007, she was like, oh, okay, are you sure? And I was like, yeah, I think so. Didn't really know what chem eng was at the time. But that still exists. So there's all of these external things, the sports we do, the hobbies we have, and that conditioning becomes internalized to a certain point. And then there's loads of research to show there's a trade-off that women face, that women are expected to be nice and gentle and soft. But if you're nice and gentle and soft, you don't do well in traditional leadership positions. So there's a trade-off, and I've forgotten the exact name for it, but effectively between likability and competence. So you can be likable but incompetent, but if you're competent, then you're deemed not so likable. And it's a trade-off that women face, that for a man, you can be likable and competent because we like a man to be assertive and push a little bit, and we respect them to have their drive and be one of the boys. Whereas if a woman is showing those traditionally masculine values, it doesn't fit with the stereotype of how a woman should be. And this is all changing constantly. You know, even my research that I did 5 years ago is borderline outdated now because gender norms are shifting and changing. Culture to culture, they're changing. Country to country, they're changing. But there is an awareness, or we should have an awareness, about what we're being taught from children and what we inherit and observe the way the world is, and how that influences how we show up in the world.
And just sticking with the women in the workplace, you also work with a few private clients and also, really women that want to be empowered in the workplace. From working with these individuals, what did you learn and notice based on their experiences, and what do they actually most need help with?
So speaking specifically in terms of career development, and the way that I have set up my coaching, or the way that I believe in or address within my coaching, within coaching in general, we often hear about a life coach or a business coach or a health coach or stuff like that, and it's very pocketed, and that's perfect for very, very niche topic. Like if I want a business coach to help me with marketing, that's a very specific skill set I need them to support me with. However, when we talk about making life changes or development coaching or career coaching, I think it's not useful to look at that single pocket on its own. If I want to progress in my career and my physical health isn't well and I have an unstable family situation at home, we're not going to do well with the career change. So the key thing for me is recognizing, and again, this is everyone, not just women, that the personal and professional are completely intertwined. So even if we're focusing on professional development, we have to be addressing what's happening in our personal lives as well. In terms of the specific areas that I've observed in coaching, I can actually even speak back to my own experience being in corporate engineering, as a senior leader in that sort of environment, all the way through to my research, my thesis for my master's degree, because that's what's come through that's the basis of the coaching now. And it's basic things. Women need more community support than guys. And if you're the only woman in the room, you're not feeling a strong sense of community there. You haven't got someone to say, we often have this stereotype of women like to go and gossip, and maybe that's true, but there's a sense of, I want to tell you my story so I can hear your story, so I can normalize my experience. And women get a much stronger sense of belonging from doing that than guys do. Guys, again, this is all generalizing, there are of course exceptions. Guys often internally process, and once they've processed, then they're ready to move forward, or then they're ready to share. So in general, lack of belonging for women, lack of support structures, lack of representation, which comes through in terms of, I see that woman at the top. I therefore can recognize, even if I want to be a mom and I can be a CEO, and both of those things can happen to me, we need trailblazers setting that way, and thankfully we are getting them now. But the more we have, the more vision there is for women to what they can do within their careers. Mentors, sponsors is one of the big things that we lack in general. Female sponsors sponsoring women lower down the career ladder, or men sponsoring women lower down the career ladder.
Sponsor from what perspective?
In terms of if there are, for example, a lot of organizations will have career development discussions or career planning and their succession planning. You need someone in that room who's going to speak your name. You need someone in your room who's going to back you and say, actually, have you thought about such and such going for that position? Maybe not ready yet, but if we work on X, Y, and Z, they're going to be ready in 2 years' time and they're going to be great at that. If no one's speaking your name, you're fighting on your own as opposed to fighting with a team. Because of the way, from a social psychological point of view, we work as humans, and this is everyone, we congregate in groups of people who look and feel like us. So, and that's a historical thing, that's a preservation thing as humans. I know my tribe, I recognize my tribe, I'm going to stay close to them. And that happens still nowadays across many, many levels. So, and to use the very stereotypical example of if that again I have experienced in my life, I don't want to go to the pub and drink pints of beer. But I know that if I don't go, there's going to be conversations that, this is in my old career, there's going to be conversations that happen there that I'm not part of, or I'm not going to get as close to this person who could be a potential sponsor for me, and then I lose out compared to my male colleague who's 4 pints deep with him and they're getting on like a house of fire. So that I don't like the terminology of a boys' club, but it does still exist in certain pockets, whether it's on the golf club, whether it's at the pub, whatever these things are, playing paddle. We need to make sure as leaders, if we are forming more informal relationships, which is great, I love that, be inclusive, but make sure that it's not just with people who look and sound like you. Because then actually if you spend time with someone who you wouldn't normally with, you might say like, oh, I didn't know you were doing that. I didn't know you delivered on that project so well. Tell me more about it. So from that's what I mean by a sponsor, someone who is backing you, not because there's an agenda, but because they believe in you. But for that to happen, they need to have spent time with you. Other areas that women face are things, in general, minority groups are often decentralized from the design of workplaces, and that could be in the policy making, in the physical space. When I first joined the factory I was working in, there was no shoes smaller than a size 6, so they had to order shoes for me specially. No biggie, but that's because I was the first female engineer there. So it's one of those things of we don't know what we're missing until we bring in diversity. And then the big one, which definitely happens in gender, also happens extensively in a racial dynamic as well, particularly in South Africa, is when the people who aren't in the in-group recognize the need for change and then are taking action around that. So for example, mentoring younger women or running events that host diversity and promote it, or spending time reconstructing policies and working with HR on this. Or things like we recognize the importance of a diverse interview panel, but if there's only one Black woman in the company, she's going to be on every interview panel then if we want diversity. That person is doing it in addition to their day-to-day job. So for people who want to initiate the change and want to promote this evolution, then to more diverse teams, more inclusive teams, they're taking on an extra burden, extra responsibility that takes away from their own career focus. If you're working a 50-hour week and you're spending 10 of it doing value add things in terms of DEI, you're 20% behind the person who's just focusing fully on their career. Women tend to take on more of those things, and people of color tend to take on more of that responsibility around how do we make things better for the next generation.
Got you. And I think also what I'm hearing from assisting and helping women feel more empowered in the workplace, it actually starts from the top. And going into now DEI, DEIB, which is also something that you specialize in, maybe could you first define that for us and then we can unpack that a bit?
Sure, the DEIB.
Yeah.
So diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Diversity is about who you have at the table. It's around making sure people are different, are diverse. And often we get hung up on gender and race because they're the kind of big visible two. But actually there's so much value in diversity in our career backgrounds, in the education that we have, and not even in terms of whether someone's got different types of degrees. Maybe someone finished high school and then immediately went into work. Well, they've got a very different work experience than someone who studied until they were 25 and actually are quite fresh in the workplace. Language diversity, able-bodyism diversity, all of these different things could be anything. So the more types of diversity we have around the table, the more diversity of thought we have. And that's important from a business point of view because we're looking at the world in different ways. There is not a lot of benefit of having different diversity unless we have inclusion. So inclusion means that whoever is around the table, they feel valued and they feel that they can speak. Their voice is valued. They're there to do a good job. They're part of it. There's a lot of terminology around token hires at the minute. So if we focus on diversity, we want to make sure that there's people of color. We want to make sure that there's women. We want to make sure that there's we're hitting criteria around disabled hires or whatever these things are. However, if you just do that as a tick box, then people know that, people feel that, and other people observe that and think. So we need to make sure that there's an inclusion aspect so that they're valued in their role.
Got you. And, just a follow-up question on this. Me as a early stage startup founder, or you're looking at an SME or large corporate, from that business point of view, why is this so important?
A number of things. There is a lot of data to show that the stronger sense of inclusion and belonging. So belonging is the feeling that we as humans get. I said that before, it's one of the psychological needs. When we have diversity, when we're included, and when there's equitable treatment and fair treatment of everyone around us, then we get a sense of belonging. I'm safe here. I want to be here. These are my people. Because I feel safe and held here, I can bring my best thinking. I don't have to focus on those lower things of survival. I can take risks. I can ask questions that I might not otherwise ask, which is actually challenging thinking. I can be more creative and not worry about rejection or not worry about being trampled. So there's a lot to show improved performance and ultimately bottom line. It's also a way to protect against, if I have 10 of me sat around the table and I come up with a marketing strategy, it's one single lens, it's single focus. And it also doesn't protect me against, there's loads of things that I'm struggling to think of an example now, where a company markets something and then they're like, oh yeah, no, they got that wrong. Like, they needed more people of color, they needed more women, they needed people who think differently in their marketing team to understand, actually you can't say that, you can't put that picture there. So there's also a certain element of self-protection for the organization, the more diverse thought we have. On a personal level, it helps our well-being. People don't want to go to work and not feel valued. They don't want to go to work and be interrupted continuously. They don't want to work and feel like their colleague who looks different to them is being treated differently to how they are. So there's a lot in terms of, both a personal and a business sense of doing this work and I think that's part of where this work has, I was not going to say gone wrong, but it's a bit too extreme. We've focused on diversity. We've focused on getting lots of different people around the table. Whereas I would argue for someone who's in a startup position, focus on inclusion. The people who are already there, get them engaged, get them feeling valued. The more we look after our employees, the more they're going to give us. They're giving their best. They're feeling positive. That becomes its own brand in terms of a culture to work for. So you're more likely to attract different people, even if that doesn't happen. And then you suddenly hire someone who is a different race, a different language speaker, whatever the diverse aspect is. When they come in, they're not going to feel like the odd one out because the team culture is already super inclusive. The team culture is already saying, there's 6 of us around the table. We know that this person hasn't spoken yet, so we actively ask them for their input. That's an inclusive culture. And if that already exists, it doesn't matter what level of diversity you're bringing in, because within the team, within the behaviors, we're already actively including people.
And me as an early stage founder, should I now have this lens of look broad? Look broad, firstly, in terms of my hiring. So I think it starts there, right? The people that you bring in the door. What should that process look like, and what should I be looking for?
We have to recognize that some people worked harder to get where they are than other people do, and that should be considered in the decision-making process around hires. But at the end of the day, if you want your business to run, you need to make sure the right person's doing the job, regardless of what they look like. So for me, in my opinion, it's do the hiring process, get your final pool of candidates, and pick from there based on demographics. Don't already at the start be filtering out people who could be amazing, but because they look the wrong color for you or the wrong gender for you, then they're out.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think, of course, understand also the type of individual that you want, and then cool, if they meet those other criteria for diversity, I think that would also be very helpful. The inclusivity part is also very interesting to me. Of course, I want to be this inclusive leader who engages with the team and makes them feel valued, from holistically also decision-making, right? Decision-making power, I think, is so crucial, especially if you're a solo founder. Now, is there a framework that I should be following to become this inclusive leader? In your, from your perspective, what does an ideal inclusive leader look like?
So I think there's two aspects for that. And to be honest, across all of this sort of work, there's two aspects. There's always looking at the individual. So for example, I do women's coaching, which is supporting their personal development through whatever changes or transformation they want to make in their life. But I'm also working on how do we make cultures that are more inclusive so that when that woman comes into the space, she already feels valued and there's less resistance for her. As a leader, we also have that two sides of the same coin. What you can do is do your internal work, your self-reflection, and understand yourself. Each of us have our own list of fears, our own list of biases, our own list of stereotypes that are impacting how we show up in the world. Everything from going to the shops and how we interact, or with the petrol, everything, through to how we exist as leaders. The more awareness, so Freud has one of Freud's less controversial models was a very simple iceberg theory, and we have our conscious and we have our subconscious. The more you can elevate the subconscious into the conscious, the more information we have about our self. I think Aristotle had some quote around self-knowledge is the source of all wisdom. Like the more we know about ourselves, the more power we have around why am I acting like this? What is holding me back? What is triggering this response or this reaction? Why do I feel pulled to hiring this person over this person? Is it an unconscious bias? Is it because actually I could see myself going for a pint with him or whatever it is at the end of the day? Am I put off by that person because of X, Y, and Z? But actually they're the right person. So what is coming up within me that's grappling with me that I need to sit with so that I feel comfortable that they're the right person? Sometimes that gut reaction is right, but sometimes there's a past experience or past internal dialogue that's happened that we resist certain things. So as a leader, we absolutely need to build our self-awareness so that we recognize how our stuff is impacting how we lead and therefore the culture in the organization. That's if you have had a bad night's sleep and you haven't had your coffee and you come in, you're in a different mood but knowing, actually, I haven't had my coffee this morning, I'm going to be a bit less patient, that impacts how we show up as a leader. The second part of it, which is a lot of the work that I'm moving more into within the DEI work, is what I would call culture assessments. And effectively, we go in, do interviews, do workshops within a team, find out what's working well, find out what the pain points are, and then use that data, that analysis, write a report and say, these are the interventions that we can do or that you need to do, even with other people, to help ease these pressure points or lean into more the things that are working. That's a very, very elaborate way of saying, listen to your employees. They're the ones that know what's working to them. If you want your employees to be serving your customers, you as a leader need to serve your employees. They know what's wrong. They know what's working well, what's working badly. By listening to them, they're going to give you that information. What happens most of the time now is that organizations pay third parties like me to come in and do the listening for them, because then there's a bit of weight behind it and it's a process. Especially as a founder, especially when there's a smaller group, that listening can happen. It doesn't need me to come in and say, oh, by the way, Naison, this person doesn't like X, Y, and Z. But in order for those conversations to be happening internally, we go back to there needs to be safety, there needs to be inclusivity so that the employee can speak up. and know that their voice is going to be heard, and know that they're not going to be interrupted or trodden or ignored. Because the worst thing we can do in the DEI world is listen and not do. Listen, hear the issues, and then say, yeah, okay, no, we haven't got money for that now. Or I don't really agree with what you're saying. Or, oh, that isn't really a priority now. Because all that's saying is I hear your experience, but it's not important enough to change now.
It's almost like that organization is just ticking a box for getting, the DEI assessment done.
Can be.
And then it's done.
Can be. And yeah, I've absolutely worked with some organizations that do that. And some where I and a lot of my peers and other consultants that I work with try to be quite discerning. You can often read people into, oh no, this feels tick boxy. I'm not really there for that, because it damages the internal culture, but it also damages my reputation. If I'm going to spend 8 hours interviewing and doing workshops, and these people are in tears and telling me this, and like some of it gets heavy. If I walk away and give the report and then nothing changes, they're going to be like, I spent all that time talking to Hilary and I bared my soul to her and she hasn't done anything about it. Well, that's bad for my reputation as well. And then it damages the internal culture more and more.
Shooting the messenger.
Yeah. And that's not to say I won't do it, but we try and be discerning around, is it a tick box or is it a real change? And sometimes you only find that out along the way. Reassuringly, more and more people are on board with, no, we want to make this effective. We want to understand, and then we want to execute on the interventions. There are, of course, some people who still want to tick box.
From the leadership perspective, change, it's challenging. Leadership of organizations from the top down to that individual. Why do we struggle as humans to change?
I think that, again, there's a number of things. There's all of those societal internalized norms that I was talking about earlier, the limits that we put on ourselves, the limits that society puts on us, often subconscious ones we haven't unpacked yet. But also, often, even when we recognize we need change, we're not sure what we want the change to be. There's not a clear vision, there's not a clear direction. And we're also not sure what the actual actions are in order to make that change. So it could be, so the word coach is from, I don't know if it's French or Latin or whatever, but it's from cocher, which literally means like a coach that you would travel in to transport from one place to the other. And that's what's happening in coaching now. We're here, we want to be over there. And if we use the analogy of like a road trip, I need to know that I'm starting in Cape Town. Then I can say I want to go on a road trip, but if I don't know where I'm going, then what do you do? And if you say, okay, cool, I'm driving to Durban or whatever, cool, so that's going to be this many hours. I'm not going to do it in a day. I need a place to stop overnight. We have a bit of an idea about this is the execution now. I know I'm going there. I know that I'm here. This is what has to happen in between. We need to plan that. And then what we need to do is actually work out, well, what are the steps that I need to take to make that happen? And the car needs to be full of fuel. We maybe need to get the tires checked. I need to pack an overnight bag. Well, all these things. So the change isn't just, I want to go on a road trip. It is, what do I want from this road trip? Where do I want to go to? What needs to happen? And what are the actual steps it's going to take? And that framework needs to be in place, whether we're talking on an individual level or an organizational change, that things become clear around, how do I move forward? How do I become unstuck?
Yeah, I love that framework. I think that it's so valuable. And, it just prompted me to think about a lack of clarity. Because in my opinion, I think that a lack of clarity leads to failed businesses. It leads to a lot of failures. So, what's your advice to an individual who wants to find that clarity? Where should they start?
I harp on and on and on about the power of reflection. Again, the external world is a mirror of what's happening within us. The more clarity we have on ourselves, the more clarity there will become around us. And that could be as simple as, what do I want my life to look like in a year's time, different from now? Well, okay, I want to run a 10K. Well, okay, we'll go and buy running shoes then. That's a very basic starting point. If you're not clear on what you want it to look like, you're not going to be able to start making that change now. But and then you get into the deeper things about, okay, I want to run a 10K. I'm not going to buy the running shoes. What's the barrier? Is it financial? Is it there's some psychological block here? Why do I actually want to run the 10K? How do I motivate myself? So there's many layers that you start unpacking under more and more. The more we use reflection, the more we get to know ourselves. And reflection could be obviously coaching, that I believe a lot in. It's as simple as journaling, talking with friends, talking with trusted friends, having time in the day where you can just actually spend time with yourself. And that can be very difficult for a lot of people.
How much does personal experience help with finding the way forward? Because I love what you're saying about reflection, right? And I think that it's super important. All those different forms, from journaling to speaking to friends to actually seeking professional coach. But I also think that there's this missing element of just putting yourself out there to experience what's out there. And maybe from that, you know, clarity can come. But I think there's a fear, you know, maybe, do you have the answer why?
I do, and I'm laughing because it's probably going to sound like a planted question, but it wasn't. So actually, the framework that I use in most of my coaching, and a colleague and I have just developed a program specifically for women through development coaching. It's an 8-session one around 6 core topics that support women. But we sat and we went round and round and round about what's the basis of this, how, if we're turning it into a program, it needs to have a basis. And what we both landed on was a model called experiential learning cycle, and it was developed by David Kolb in 1984. And there's 4 stages, and it's concrete experience. Now I have to remember them. Concrete experience, observation, conceptual learning, and then basically the application of it. Okay. So we have an experience, and that could be I, as a leader, arrived at work. None of my team, we had a team meeting, none of my team had done anything. I got really angry, shouted at them, and left. Okay, cool. Let's take a step back in that reflection. So that's the concrete experience. Let's take a step back in that reflection phase then to say, observe what happened. Observe you in the morning. Observe the team. Observe the communication beforehand. Just, it's almost like watching what happened on a movie and recording as much detail as possible. We then take the next step, which is the conceptualization, and we say, what did I learn from that? Now that I'm out of it, the emotions have probably calmed down a bit. What did I learn from what is happening here? Oh, well, I see that actually my mood started in the morning because I got stuck in traffic. And this happened, and I came in and there was already a tension, so maybe there was something happening between those two. And I've learned this about myself, and I've learned this about my team, and I've definitely learned that by shouting at them, it doesn't help. So cool. We go on to the 4th phase to say, okay, if something like this happens again, what am I going to do differently? How do we apply that conceptual learning within a real life space? And then we go back around to the top. The next time it happens and you arrive and you're a little bit angry and they haven't done their work, and you go like, oh, okay, wait, I've got a plan for this. Let's engage slightly differently. That experience happens, and then we start the reflective cycle again. So experience is massive, but experience only helps if we learn from the experience. And we all have our patterns in all aspects of life, and often we repeat them time and time and time in relationships, in work, in, you know, people wanting to lose weight is a big one as well. We have all our patterns, and it's only after like 10 times that you're like, hang on, I recognize this stone, I've been here before. Whereas if we are actively choosing to go through reflection, observation, all of those aspects as well, we speed up that process because we're intentionally pausing to say, okay, this felt like a big moment, let me already start the learning on it, rather than it happening 4 times before I have to recognize a pattern. Yeah,
I think that's super helpful. And, you know, you prompted another thought, which is awareness. I think that you also spoke about earlier, the taking what's in your unconscious, bringing it up to the surface, the iceberg, and then unpacking that. And I think that is also at the base of living a happy and fulfilled life.
Absolutely.
Is that awareness about actually what you want to go and live it.
Yeah.
And what I found...
And also, sorry to interrupt, also the things that might be stopping you from living it. Maybe
Correct.
You already know, but maybe there's something just below the surface that's a barrier.
Correct. But once more, we have to develop this, you know, high level awareness of actually there is something there. Firstly, being aware that you're aware, right?
Yeah.
just trying to keep this question a bit grounded. But I think that most individuals are so unaware of how they're living, what they're going through on the day to day, and would resort to all sorts of bottling, suppression of emotions, and acceptance without really, consciously accepting their day-to-day and reality. So unpacking all of this and actually establishing an awareness, where does that individual start?
So what's coming to mind as you ask that is that there's another model which explores consciousness and competence, and all of us start with unconscious incompetence. So we don't know what we don't know. And then we move to conscious incompetence, where we suddenly realize, like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing here. And then we move to conscious competence, where we're like, oh, okay, I know what I'm doing and I'm aware that I'm doing this, but I'm still concentrating. And then we move to unconscious competence, where it becomes second nature. And one of the easiest ways to imagine that is driving. If you've never driven a car before, I haven't got a clue what's going on. You just get in, trust the driver knows what they're doing. The first time you sit behind the wheel, you're like, okay, I don't know what this pedal does, and it's actually jerky, and the brake and gears and all that. And then all of a sudden you learn to drive, and you're like, I can drive, but I'm still quite nervous, and I'm working on what I'm doing. And then I drove here today and couldn't have tell you what route I'd taken, because you just drive, and it's that model. So by understanding, again, having that vision, understanding what the change is, we recognize that with everything, we're starting in the unconscious incompetence, whether, again, it's that learning to run, whether it's, I need to learn to run, what do I need in order to do this? I need running shoes, and I need to know where it's safe to run outside, so let me look at that. Recognizing where we start with unconscious incompetence, what we don't know that we don't know, can't do, all those things, we then build from, what do I need to know? I'm aware that I don't know how to do this, so let me find the answers to it. Some
parting wisdom. I think, Mike, you've answered quite a lot and provided a lot of value. But for someone that's, beginning of their journey, either entrepreneur that's just starting off, or an individual that just wants to improve, super driven, but, doesn't know what's next. I think what I'm trying to get at is that starting point. Just like the kitchen analogy that you used, which is get up and make a cup of tea. I think that now we get so overwhelmed with like this, expectations of, I'm supposed to have this big business or grand life. That next step, what's the best practice in terms of a framework that you would provide for that next step?
And I'm actually thinking, I have a free download on my website that I'll share with you, because you can put it up and start sharing. And it's a very simple introduction to this is what reflection is, and here's an exercise to start thinking about it. Reflection is a skill. We talk about the reflective muscle. As with everything, we need to start small. You don't go into the gym and lift 100 kg. So it's a small exercise.
Speak for yourself. Joking.
I don't go into the gym and lift 100 kg. But we start small around every day. At the end of the day, write down the things that you are most proud of, or the thing that you're most grateful for, or tell your family or whoever you sit down for dinner with, have a conversation with them. What went well for you today? What did you really enjoy? What did not go down? Intentionally just drip feed in small reflective questions. It doesn't have to be, what do you want your vision to be in 10 years time? Or, this deep thing about how is your inner child wounded. Start small. It's really, really easy. When someone says, how's your day going? It depends. If it's at the petrol station, just say great. But if it's your partner, if it's your friends, be quite open to say, actually, this is how it's gone today, because we start to learn about ourselves. Many of us just are on, especially when we're busy, especially when we're in the do mode, we just power through from 6 a.m. when the alarms go off until we head hits the pillow again. And there's no moment to say, what did I learn today? What did I enjoy? What went well for me? What didn't go well? Do I want tomorrow to be like today? It's just small little things that we can start. And whether that is, I'm a writer, so I love journaling. People like talking. A lot of people, I've recently restarted swimming, and that for me is very meditative, because it's me in a pool and I'm safe. I'm not going to drown, hope, but it's different to running even, because there's nothing external. There's no other sound. It's just me and my body. And a lot of my big problems get solved while I'm swimming, both on a personal and professional level, because it's time just with myself. So whatever works for different people, just slowly but surely start to ask yourself questions about yourself and then go from there. And maybe then the questions become, okay, what does this mean for business? Is my business going the way I want it to? What went well with my team today? Then when we're back in the team thing, maybe at the end of the team meeting, we say, guys, I just want to find out, what was your reflection on today? What was your reflection on this week, this month? What went well? What are we struggling with? And then you're helping with their reflection, you're learning as a leader, and you're building that inclusivity as part of the team.
Amazing. Next steps, what's in the pipeline?
For me?
Yeah.
Oh, so as I mentioned, this program that we're launching, it's called 328, all numbers. And yeah, it's a eight session block specifically into 6 key areas. So identity, vision, rest and rhythms, support, limiting beliefs, and voice were the key topics. So we explore each of those topics and then have a coaching session on it, and then do some integration, running that out as an individual program. And then it's also to run out hopefully more and more within corporates, and we do it as team coaching as well. That adds a lot of value. So yeah, building that with a colleague, which is great, and very, very excited. I have a very strong feeling that this is going to have some good work there and good impact on the world. And then once that's a bit more up and running and established, I'm going to lean more into the culture assessment that we were talking about. So going in, the part of my mind that is still an engineering mind loves the qualitative work and the analysis and the problem solving around that as well. And as I said, I don't think it's one responsibility to support women or one responsibility to support organizations. It's 2 sides of the same coin that we need to be working in both ways. So those are the 2 seeds that are planted into the world. And then in the meantime, yeah, just existing collaborations and nice projects coming in and stuff like that. So
and enjoying life.
Always waiting for summer to come.
You and me both. Hilary, thank you. This was super insightful.
Thank you, Naison. Yeah, I really enjoyed. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.